Welcome to EPG Pathshala. This module, Quota, Politics and Gender, is the second module of fourth unit, that is Women and Reservation Contemporary Debate of the Women's Studies course. The objective of this module is to orient the reader regarding how gender plays out as a category in the dynamics of quota politics. In this module, I begin by introducing the concept of quota system. What does a quota mean? What does it imply? I then move on to define the different types of quotas, where I include candidate quota, reserved quota and gender neutral quotas. In the subsequent section, I try to cover all the debates or the raging controversies around the notion of quota system. In this, I cover both the arguments given in favor of and against quota system. In the next section, I cover some of the theoretical issues like why 33% has been considered to be the critical mass, some other theoretical issues, and then how the implementation of quota has been a very challenging or daunting task. In the concluding section, I summarize the module. Now I shall begin by introducing what is quota system. Promoting citizenship and equality has been the central concern for all liberal democracies. The notion of positive discrimination in this sense, in the form of reservations, has been considered to have ameliorative potential. Quota is one of the kinds of positive discrimination, or one ways in which positive discrimination can be actually applied or put into practice. J.M. Nicol defines a quota as quote, numerical goal or requirement for the admission or hiring of members of specified groups within a certain time and until a certain percentage is reached. So two things are critical to this definition. One is that it has to be done within a time frame, and the second is that there has to be a certain percentage which has to be pre-decided and then it has to be reached. Gender quotas have been seen as an effective measure in redressing gender imbalance and ensuring gender equality and justice. And in that sense, they have been tried to be implemented across the world in different countries in different ways. However, in the context of India, the implementation of gender quotas has met with fierce debate and controversy in the context of implementing them, especially in the legislative bodies. I shall now start discussing the types of quotas. Types of quota. The two most common types of electoral gender quotas are candidate quota and reserved quota. Candidate quota applies to the lists of candidates for election given by political parties. It specifies the minimum percentage of candidates for election that must be women. It could be done in two ways. First, legal candidate quotas, which may be laid down by the Constitution, in electoral laws, or in the laws regulating political parties. Enacted by legislation, such a quota may force all the political parties to nominate or select women as constituting the required percentage of electoral candidates. Second, voluntary party quotas, which may be adopted voluntarily by political parties. Second, reserved quota. In this system, a certain number of seats in a legislature are set aside for women among the representatives. This may be done by specifying in the Constitution or enforcement through legislation. A constitutionally provided electoral quota for women is found in Nepal, the Philippines, and Uganda, among some other countries. Legislative quotas are provided in many parts of Latin America, Belgium, Bosnia, Serbia, and Sudan. Reserved seats may be filled by appointment or by election. Filling the reserved seats by election implies counting them among the electoral quotas. This is practiced in Uganda, where 56 seats are reserved for women, one woman in each district to be elected by a separate electorate. Rwanda, where 30% of the seats are reserved for women by the Constitution, where women are elected by a special procedure, and Tanzania, where 20% of the seats are reserved for women, which are allocated to the political parties in proportion to the number of parliamentary seats won in an election. Reserved seats can also be filled by appointment. Examples of such a system being practiced are such as in Kenya and some Arab states. I now come to the third kind of quotas, that are gender neutral quotas. Instead of being gender specific, as the above mentioned quota systems are, quotas can be gender neutral. Quotas for women require a minimum number or percentage of women. Gender neutral quota provisions set a minimum and maximum for both the sexes, typically no more than 60% and no less than 40% of positions for either sex. In the case of gender neutral quota provisions, the quota sets a maximum for both sexes, which quotas for women do not. In countries with a high level of female parliamentarians, such as the Scandinavian countries, gender neutral quotas have in a few cases led to men moving up on the lists in order to fulfill the quota provisions. Gender neutral quota rules are sometimes used as a strategic choice in order to refute the arguments of opponents of quotas that they are discriminatory against men. Let us now try to look into the debate on the issue of quota. The arguments given in defense of gender quotas. Anne Phillips has divided the arguments relating to proportion of women elected into 4 groups. First, those who dwell on the role model successful women politicians offer. Second, those that appeal to principles of justice between the sexes. Third, those that identify particular interests of women that would be otherwise overlooked. And fourth, those that stress women's different relationship to politics and the way their presence will enhance the quality of political life. The following arguments have been made in favor of quotas for women, largely falling within Phillips' 4 groups of arguments. A. It has been argued that institutionalized inequalities require institutionalized countermeasures. B. The question of women's underrepresentation in legislative bodies is also cited as one of the causes why gender quotas are considered to be necessary. As Kumud Sharma writes, the number of women parliamentarians has never exceeded more than 7%. The protagonists of reservation for women argue that the male-dominated political system refuses to provide space for women, and reservations of seats will help in creating political space for women and will also lead to the social mobilization of women. Women are arguing for parity and not charity and see reservation as a vehicle for social justice. C. It has been argued that only women can speak on behalf of women, expressing their wishes and concerns and the diversity of their views. Women as representatives is thus expected to bring women's issues and perspectives into focus within the political space and affect decision making positively for women. D. It is contended that fewer the women in public life, the lesser the likelihood of distinctively female values, priorities, and characteristics finding expression. Hence, women's involvement in political process and decision making in greater numbers can make a significant difference. A faith in women's moral superiority in providing clean politics is expressed in this contention. Several arguments have been leveled against the gender quotas. A. Firstly, those arguing against gender quotas called it inherently undemocratic and against the principle of inequality. B. As Dhanda has pointed out, it, that is gender quotas, raises troubling doubts about what it means to be represented. There have been doubts regarding whether the quotas would sufficiently ensure women's issues to be taken up, whether the women representatives would be able to and willing to voice out women's concerns in the parliament. C. It has been argued that gender quotas do not take into account the differences between women. In the Indian context, this argument has been extended to the demand for quotas within quotas or subquotas. There have been doubts regarding the efficacy of such an intervention without necessary structural changes in the society. Singh has commented, quote, "To try and push reforms without necessary social support is mere adventurism, mere symbolism. The damaging impact of ill-thought intervention, even if the intention is noble, is no less serious than inaction and paralysis." Unquote. E. Questions have been raised against reservation as to whether an increase in numerical strength of women in the political process and decision-making bodies automatically leads to a qualitative shift in power, and whether women on balance pay greater attention to the concerns of women more than male politicians. Problems of tokenism, visibility, marginality, etc. are often discussed in referring to women as a minority operating within a largely male domain. Women's rights and responsibilities to participate equally in political life should not, however, be treated as a minority issue. The political space must belong to all citizens, women and men. F. There have been doubts about the caliber of women parliamentarians who might benefit from a quota without having any work to show for it. G. There are doubts that gender quotas will lead to women being entrapped in divisive politics, where women will be pitched against women. Next, some have even referred to the problem of ghettoization of women's issues. Even those like Kishwar, who are in favor of increasing women's political participation, raise technical questions regarding the suggested procedures for instituting gender quota in legislative bodies. Next, there have been doubts regarding the goal of gender quotas, which is construed to be just mirror representation without any change in the power equations. There has been skepticism regarding rise of nepotism and tokenism, even to the extent where Kishwar explicitly raises concerns regarding ending up with a what she calls quote-unquote BV Beti brigade. Even in the case of women representatives in local bodies, many of them have been labeled as proxy women, where their husbands may act as stand-ins for them, so much so that they can take decisions on their behalf. Lastly, it has been alleged that the bid to introduce the Women's Reservation Bill on gender quotas is an upper caste ploy to stem the rising tide of lower caste men in legislative bodies. Vandana Sonelkar contends that the question of caste and gender as aspects of the citizen subject has been brought to the fore even as the 81st Constitutional Amendment brought up the issue of reservations for non-upper caste women within the reservations for women in Parliament and state legislatures. Vasanthi Raman also writes, quote, "In a plural society like ours, the political system has to ensure a modicum of equality between all the groups and communities if history's longest oppression is to be seriously tackled. This would imply that the struggle for gender justice and equality will have to be woven into the struggle for emancipation of each of the oppressed groups and communities." Unquote. Dhanda has tried to analyze the impasse that is reached between those debating in favor of and against the gender quotas. While doing so, she has argued that justifications for gender quotas in legislative bodies must move beyond a quote-unquote consequentialist framework. She has rather suggested paying more attention to identity concerns as a more fruitful way of understanding the opposition and support for the use of gender quotas in ensuring the representation of women in legislative bodies. Let us now discuss some other significant issues. Besides the above arguments for and against quotas, there have been other discussions and debates on the issues related to quota for women. These range from the discussions on the determination of 33% as the critical mass to theoretical issues and challenges in the implementation of quotas. Why 33%? The critical mass theory. The Women's Reservation Bill seeks to reserve 33% of the seats for women in the lower house of the Parliament and the state legislatures based on the critical mass theory. The theory stems from the seminal works of Cantor and Dallerup. In a study of an American corporation with culturally diverse population, she found that the numerically many, the dominants, control the group's culture, while the numerically fewer, whom she calls the tokens, are reduced to symbolic representatives of their social category. Taking Cantor's work further to women in politics, Dallerup argued that minorities in proportion ranging between 15 to 40 are strong enough to begin to influence the culture of the group. The notion of the critical mass is borrowed from physics, which refers to the quantity needed to start an irreversible process. Dallerup studied the Scandinavian parliament, taking 30% as the critical mass for a minority to be able to make difference. The Scandinavian parliament had around one-third of its seats occupied by women at the time of this study. In 1990, the United Nations Economic and Social Council endorsed the implementation of measures to reach the target of 30% women in national legislatures by 1995. However, there have been questions on the magic number of 33% by some scholars. Madhu Kishwar points out that reservations to the SCs and STs in India was determined on the basis of their proportion in the overall population. Extending the same logic to reservations for women would imply extending 49% reservation to women, unquote. Let us now come to some other theoretical issues. The discussion on quotas includes discussions on some important theoretical issues. As Dallerup points out, quote, quotas represent a change in public equality policy from equal opportunities to equality of results, unquote. However, there are more theoretical questions regarding the concept of representation itself. In her classic text, The Concept of Representation, Hannah Pitkin argues that there is no common understanding about the nature of representation and about what fair representation is. In regard to the distinction between representation of ideas and social representation, quotas for women relate to the latter position. Opponents of quota systems often argue from the standpoint of the former. Menon also refers to this in her paper, where she alludes to the phenomenon of groups seeking recognition in representative bodies on the basis of ethnic, religious, or gender identity as a shift from ideology to identity. While analyzing the many arguments against quotas, Anne Phillips asks why everybody accedes to the demand for women's participation but not for equal representation. She advocates gender quotas in a system that combines the politics of ideas with politics of presence. Phillips only, thus as Menon notes, quote, makes a minimalist case for quotas while rejecting the idea of representation, unquote. It has also been argued that quotas work differently under different electoral systems. As Dallerup writes, quotas are most easily introduced in proportional representation, that is PR systems, and other multi-list systems. In general, it is much more complicated to construct gender quotas that are appropriate for single-member constituency electoral systems. Only one-third of the countries around the world with plurality or majority electoral systems have introduced some kind of gender quota as compared to 4/5 of the countries with PR systems, as per Dallerup, reported in 2007. Rendall also writes that, quote, ceteris paribus, women are much less likely to be selected as party candidates in single-member districts under a first-past-the-post electoral system because they will be in direct competition with men in a zero-sum contest. In addition, although in these circumstances gender quotas might seem more necessary, the evidence from developed countries indicates that parties are more reluctant to adopt them, unquote. Adoption of gender quotas is positively associated with party list proportional representation systems and perhaps more significantly, multi-member districts. It is to note that India adopted a single-member first-past-the-post system after independence in continuance of one during the colonial times, rejecting the demands from minority groups on the plea of it being a complex system to carry on. Let us now discuss quotas in political parties. Many political parties in Europe have introduced party quotas through party statutes. Party quotas have been a common policy in Norway, Sweden, and Germany. A table has been given which shows the ways in which political representation had been granted to women in various countries. Global Database of Quotas for Women, International IDEA and Stockholm University and Interparliamentary Union is the source for the given table. The table shows that the countries where women are getting widest representation are mostly those providing for quota in political parties. In general, the political parties are the gatekeepers to gender balance in political decision making because they control the secret garden of nominations, unquote. In democratic political systems, parties control or dominate the selection and nomination processes. This points towards recruitment, and an admission of the importance of such recruitments may lead to the convention that even legislative quotas may be rendered ineffective in the wake of absence of party quotas. Even the supporters of quotas have been skeptical regarding the possibility of reaching the level of quota even if it is enacted. There are others who consider quotas in political parties to be a better alternative. However, the reluctance of political parties to accept or implement party quotas offers a big hurdle in this. In India, only a very few of the political parties have tried to increase the number of women in party organizations. This may have to do with the tacit acceptance of the fact that the political climate of the country renders it difficult for women to enter and survive in politics. Menon refers to a proposal made by the Election Commission whereby all political parties should mutually agree on the percentage of seats where they will mandatorily field women candidates in parliamentary and assembly elections. This was, however, construed to be a compromise formula by the left parties that will only ensure tickets for women and not guarantee their victory. Menon says that such a move should be a self-regulatory move instead of being a kind of policing by the Election Commission. Gail Ombet also, while supporting the proposal of parties reserving a proportion of their tickets for women, does not talk about any role of Election Commission in it. Kishwar, while proposing the Alternative Women's Reservation Bill, that is AWRB, also proposes enacting of a law to make it mandatory for all political parties to nominate women candidates in election in 1/3 of the constituencies. This should be done also in the case of seats reserved for SCs and STs. The implementation of gender quotas, there have also been debates about whether quotas may work for women or they have to be made to work for women. This points towards implementation issues which may render quotas useless. To summarize, a quota is a numerical goal or a requirement for hiring or admission of members of specified groups within a certain time and until a certain percentage is reached. That is how G.M. Nichol has described a quota. A quota is also seen as one of the ways in which positive discrimination can be actually put into practice in societies where inequality has been institutionalized through social structures in the past. The quota system has its own dynamics, and the present module tried to describe how gender actually plays as a category in the dynamics of gender politics. In spite of controversies, gender quotas have been largely seen as an effective way of redressing gender imbalance and ensuring gender equality and justice. Several countries have adopted various kinds of gender quotas. In this module, we have also discussed what are the different types of quotas, which include candidate quota, reserved quota, and gender-neutral quotas. We have also seen that in different countries, gender quotas have been incorporated in different ways, like reserving tickets in political parties to other forms of. Besides, arguments have been leveled against and also in favor of gender quotas. However, in the context of India, the demand for gender quotas in legislative bodies, including the parliament and the state legislatures, has been severely criticized, and the Women's Reservation Bill has faced multiple derailments. Thank you.